This
and
conference
we
will
have
now be recorded.
a very international turnout, a lot of French-speaking representation. So welcome, bienvenue, bienvenidos. So we have a very special session today in the Cleveland, Ohio Salesforce Developer Group. Where your host and co-leads, Linda Kane and myself, Orlando Briseño. Some housekeeping points for the virtual event. To preserve bandwidth, we'll turn cameras off and stay on mute until you have something that you want to add. Ask questions in the chat, and we will be recording.
Just a word on the recording. We're recording off a different platform, so you won't see the recording work.
Or presenters, Metazoa, and I'm gonna introduce Myla Ruggiero. She's gonna tell you about a raffle that they're gonna be conducting.
Hi everybody, my name is Myla, and I work for Metazoa as an event marketing intern. We're super happy to be here, and thank you for everybody for coming out. As a sponsor for this meeting, we are going to be hosting a raffle. I just posted a link in the chat, and if you want to opt in, you can go ahead and click on that and provide, I think it's your first name, last name, and an email. But we're giving away some pretty cool stuff. Winners will be able to choose between an Echo Show 5 and a selfie ring light with a tripod stand. So yeah, click on that link. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Myla. We have some upcoming events in the local groups. Linda, you wanna mention these? Have scheduled something for our group, the developer group, on November 14th.
Sorry, I'm gonna echo if I talk. So.
Okay, no, it's not a problem. So yeah, we have a placeholder for this group for November 14th. The topic is to be defined, and in December we're planning on doing another social event like we did last year. Again, we're defining what's going to be, and Linda's having the Cleveland Salesforce Saturday. There are a few dates left on October 31st, November 7th, and November 21. 2 in the morning. The November 7th one, it's in the afternoon. You can reach out to Linda on Twitter. That's one of the best channels to reach out to her, or in LinkedIn, and she will send you an invite for those. The Acronym user group is having a very fun and cool series of events around Lightning flows. They had 2 already, and there are a few more to go. 1 in October, 2 in December. And Sarah, the group lead, they did a great job finding very stellar presenters. And for those of you that don't know, Dreamforce, it's gonna be virtual this year, of course. You can go ahead and register. And for any of you that would like to present in the group, we will be more than happy to have you. A few of the attendees today have presented in the past. Joey, the lead of the Philippines user group, and now Bill. And if you have something that you want to share, we'll be happy to have you. So, our main presenter or stellar sponsor is Bill Appleton. He's the CTO of Metazoa. I know Metazoa as the DevOps company. Bill is a leading expert on authoring tools, API service, and smart client applications. And without further ado, I pass the button to Bill.
All right, hello everybody. It's great to see so many people coming from all around the world here. And let me share my screen here. And first thing, can you see my presentation?
We can.
All right, great. Well, yeah, thank you, Linda and Orlando, for having me. And as you see questions come in over the messages, let's just relay those to me just in the middle of things, maybe between slides, and we'll make it interactive and talk about a lot of different things today. So I'm a veteran software designer and engineer, and I've built maybe 3 dozen different products over the years, and I've spent the last 10 years working with Salesforce quite a bit. And it's an exciting time at Salesforce. Salesforce is in the middle of a really interesting transition from being a great CRM product to being a real enterprise platform. But Salesforce is different than a lot of other enterprise platforms. And so there's a lot of databases out there, but Salesforce is more than a database. There's a lot of programming languages out there, but Salesforce is more than a programming language. So it's really interesting to see Salesforce in this transition and how things are working out. And a lot of it has to do with Salesforce DX, source-based development, and really where a lot of the action is in moving to second-generation packages. And that's kind of a big part of this transition. So those are some of the things I'm going to talk about today. First, I wanted to just show you, this is kind of a cool picture. This is where I am, although this was over a century ago. And it's a town called Los Gatos, and it's close to Silicon Valley, close to San Jose, but it's right on the foothills. And our office is at one university, and that red arrow is pointing to that window there. That's the window to our office. And so it's just really cool to see it, here with a horse and buggy. And I guess back then, it was ranchers and railroad men and farmers and people staying in this tenement. We're at 123 University, and today, same place. This is just from Google Maps Street View. This is Main Street, and the university goes to the right. So Los Gatos hasn't changed that much, but we do have cars now. But I just thought that's interesting to show you. And it's great to see so many people from France and from Ohio and from all around the world here for the presentation today. All right, so I want to talk about a big issue that's, I think, kind of underlies almost everything else we're going to talk about, and that's org complexity. If your org is getting more complex every day, eventually it's going to become unusable. And we see this with our customers all the time. We see customers that are actually trying to decide, should they give up on an org? Should they just start over? Or can they possibly fix it? And you know the story that, maybe, some administrator came in at one point and used every feature that Salesforce had, and then they left, and then none of that was documented, and then the org got bigger and bigger, and then other people came in. But anyway, org complexity is really important, and it throttles account expansion, it increases the cost of ownership, and it tends to hit the biggest orgs the hardest. So some of the most entangled assets are profiles and permission sets, custom objects, record types, page layouts. These tend to get tangled up with everything else, and they have dependencies between them. And so just for example, if you have 1,000 custom objects with about 500 fields per object, and you have 500 profiles, that's 250 million field permissions. Now, an average field permission could take up 250 bytes if you download the metadata. And so that's 50 gigabytes of data just in your field permissions. And so aside from the number and the size, you know, your profiles are what control who can see what in your Salesforce org. They control security. And so it's really a big problem in that you have enormous complexity, you have enormous security risk because you're not, you know, it's very difficult to look at that many permissions and see what's going on. That's just field permissions. And so you have to realize objects and record types and page layouts, it's like an n-dimensional expansion of complexity from that point on. So I think that's a really important issue, and a big culprit for complexity and generating complexity is the setup menu. So obviously I'm having a little fun here with the monkeys in the dumpsters. See if you can count how many monkeys there are. But anyway, the reason I bring this up is, you know, the setup menu is kind of where all this gets started, almost certainly. And certainly for older orgs and for org-based development. And you know the story. You've got 100 users and 50 of them are admins. And it's Tuesday night at 9:30, and one of them goes into the org and makes some changes. And Wednesday morning, the org doesn't work anymore. And so that's the type of thing that can happen with the setup menu. And you know, this is kind of a legendary story. You may have stories like this yourself of how things can go horribly wrong with this wonderful ability to make quick changes to a Salesforce org and setup. The other thing to think about is if you picture big companies, and so a lot of our customers are big companies, big enterprise customers. This is not okay with them. This is not what they are used to. They want to know what is in their Salesforce org, what was in it last week, and what's going to be in it next month. I mean, they want to be able to compare and look at those changes and control it for compliance and security and corporate governance and all these new regulations. You know, this is very important to them. It's not something that they take lightly at all. And are we counting 13 monkeys just to ask? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Or is it 12? Great movie with Brad Pitt, 12 monkeys. So anyway, that's kind of the setup menu. The setup menu causes a lot of heartburn for big companies and for Salesforce release management. And so we're in the middle of this kind of paradigm shift. And the two parts of it are org-based administration and source-based development. And so what are we talking about? So source-based development is really where you keep all of your metadata that describes your org in a folder and you can look at it. And so that really is the opposite in some ways of org-based administration. So in org-based administration, the Salesforce org is the source of truth, and you can you know, that's kind of where you're storing all of your metadata and the metadata that matters to your production org. And then source-based is really, well, yes, you've got your metadata in your account, but what you're going off of, what you're developing, is metadata that's in a folder or in a repository. And so that kind of shows you this transition that Salesforce is going through today. You know, from a great CRM product to a full-blown enterprise platform. And so part of what is happening at Salesforce is they're looking for ways that they can make Salesforce more familiar to enterprise software developers. So, you know, these enterprise software developers, they're used to repositories, they're used to code development, they're used to comparing the previous and the current version of things, and moving through software development, version 4, version 5, version 6, and then being able to independently test those applications and things like that. And so that's what a lot of Salesforce DX is about, and that's what a lot of the changes are to Salesforce, is that you've got more developers writing applications, and you now have a greater need for compliance and governance. And what my job is talking to customers about what are the best practices to move in this direction and to take Salesforce from just a CRM product to a place where you can build all kinds of apps for your company. And I think this is really important for the customers and for Salesforce, in that a CRM product has a wealth of data that's super useful for all kinds of different things. So, for example, you've got customer data, contacts, account data, you've got users. These are very fundamental objects that you can do a lot of things with in enterprise software. And so we talked a little bit about org-based administration. And so, some of you, this is more for administrators. Some of you are familiar with change and release management, using the setup menu and change sets and data loader. Our snapshot product is good at org-based administration. And, then you go through stages where, every 3 times a year, as you know, Salesforce releases a new version. Then you have the user acceptance and the integration testing for those new versions. And really, the administrator's job is to make sure that that Salesforce org responds to evolving business needs that the company has. And so org-based administration is vital, and it's not going away. We'll talk about that here in a little bit, despite what anybody might tell you. But to respond, especially to application development and enterprise application development, we've got this new concept of source-based development, especially as it pertains to Salesforce DX. And so, so we're a lot of these new tools in Visual Studio Code, and the use of repositories and so forth are really for enterprise software developers, and source-based code control and versioning, and especially the ability to do code merge. So that's a really important capability. If you have a bunch of developers who are building something, one of the first problems you will encounter is, how do I take all of their individual efforts and merge them together to deliver the destination org or the production version of those assets that they've been working on? And it's a pretty big problem in just software development in general. I know my team uses, we have a whole bunch of different versions of our software, and we're keeping track of the changes over time. If there's a problem, we can roll it back. We can test changes independently, see, what difference they make, and if they work, we can look at how it was before and after. All of that's really, really important. And so because of that, about, I guess, 2 years ago, Salesforce launched Salesforce DX. And I don't know if you used it, but Salesforce DX is a client command line oriented system that provides access to a number of APIs. And it's really more than that, because it's also things that are in your Salesforce org itself. And so, but the basic idea is that you can pull metadata down from the Salesforce org and put it in a folder on your desktop. You can edit those assets and then use them to create packages or to push metadata into a destination org. And so this really brings up some issues of things like continuous integration and source control. So just imagine you've got a team of developers who are all working on the same metadata assets. They're making changes. You see the new version of them. And then what can you do with that? You can create a package with it. You can push it into a destination org. And so those are important capabilities, and also things like continuous integration, where you want multiple developers to be building things. You want all of these things to be merged and unified as those changes are made in a destination org. So two of the new things in Salesforce DX that are really cool, and you should check out if you have not already, are Dev Hubs and Scratch Orgs. So any production Salesforce org, you can go into setup and turn on the Dev Hub. And I like to think of a Dev Hub as your own private app exchange. So, you know, you can put your own packages there and you can deploy them and you can create them and you can version them. These new second generation packages, which we'll talk more about here in a moment. And it's private. It's for your development team. It's for your administration of the org. And this way you can keep all of any important applications that you built. You can put them in a package. You can maintain and manage multiple versions of them, and then you can deploy them anywhere that you want. And if, you know, if the deployment doesn't work, you can roll it back. If you can test them then individually. And so that's really where Scratch Orgs come in. So when you have your Dev Hub turned on, you can create Scratch Orgs. And there's kind of a limit to how many you can create, but it's a lot. And they last for, I think, you know, some time limit up to 17 days. And so the purpose of a Scratch Org, there's a lot of things you can do with them, but one of the best things is you can create a Scratch Org and push a package into a Scratch Org, or push some metadata assets into a Scratch Org and go test it out. And so one of the things you can do is you can control the shape and the characteristics of the Scratch Org to make it like your production account or different from your production account. And then you can spin up a Scratch Org, push a package into it, push some metadata assets into it, and test them in isolation. And so this is important if you have certain characteristics in your production orgs or in your sandboxes that you want to mimic in a Scratch Org. If you're an ISV partner, so if you're an App Exchange publisher, then you can use Scratch Orgs to create many different types and styles of org to test your product. And then when you're done, you can throw them away. And so this is kind of an important thing to software development, is that you want to be able to kind of have reproducible systems that give you the same results when you do the same thing. And so Scratch Org is much more of a source-based production environment. So you can spin up a Scratch Org, it's a blank slate, you can inject a package into it and then test it out. And then the next time you do that, you'll have the exact same environment. So that's kind of an approach. So Scratch Orgs also offer a new capability called source tracking. And source tracking will actually keep track of all of the changes that have been made to a Scratch Org from a metadata standpoint. You know, if you've made a new custom object, if you've created a new field, if you've created a new tab or flow, that information will be in the Scratch Org. And that's kind of like the setup audit trail, but it's machine readable. It's a much more rigorous listing of all that stuff than setup audit trail. And so one of the things you can do with the Scratch Org is push and pull source. So just to give you an example, you can set up a Scratch Org with your package, and then you can go into the Scratch Org and launch it and go to the setup menu and customize that org or that package. And then you can pull those changes back to the client. And then you can make changes with them at the client. You can use text editors or Visual Studio Code or whatever you want to use and make changes on that source-based project. And then you can turn around and push that back into a Scratch Org and test it out. So pushing and pulling source and source tracking is a way to use a Scratch Org really as a development tool and as a testing tool for packages that you've created and things like that. And the last thing about Salesforce DX I think that's really notable is unlocked packages. So we're going to talk in detail about the different types of packages, but this is a very important kind of new capability. You may be used to the old unmanaged packages. They're pretty good. You may be used to managed packages. If you're an App Exchange developer, they're pretty good. But unlocked packages, what Salesforce calls second generation packaging, have a whole bunch of new capabilities. We're going to go through some of that, but this is really a way that you can take useful sections of things in your Salesforce org today and package them so that they're isolated and they're individually testable, and they can be used by a single development team to create multiple versions. And then you can install those assets into a sandbox, into production. And what's good about it is it reduces the complexity of your org. It organizes your org at a more fundamental level. And we're going to talk about that a little bit in more detail as well. So hope this is making sense to everybody. You know, a lot of what this comes down to is where are you going to store your metadata? So just to level set, make sure everyone knows what metadata is. The metadata is the customizations that you've made to your Salesforce account. And you can take, there's a metadata API, and you can take the metadata API and download all of the customizations in your Salesforce org. And so what does that show you? It shows you, here's the custom objects I have, here's the fields, here's the profiles, here's the custom tabs and the flows, and here's the Apex classes. And there's about 250 different metadata types. And so that is really a way to understand from a compliance perspective what's in your Salesforce org. But then if you want to move those customizations, say from sandbox to production or something like that, then the metadata API can also move those customizations. And so a lot of tools like change sets and our snapshot product and other tools that deal with metadata are built on top of the metadata API. But now with source-based development, we really have this idea of a local project. And what's that like? So a local project is where those metadata files are on your hard disk. And you can edit them with a text editor. But you're in some cases editing XML, in some cases editing code. So it depends on what your specialty is, but you can definitely edit that stuff and then push it from your local folder into an org, into a package, into a sandbox. And so developers with local projects, they tend to use less of the metadata asset types. They tend to use Apex code, triggers, custom applications, custom tabs, custom objects, flows. They don't tend to use the other 200 metadata types that an administrator might want to use. So, for example, if you go to the far right of this slide and look at Salesforce org, administrators really are usually involved in all of the different metadata types because they need to show that all of these different types are, say between a sandbox and production, are correctly set up or are the same or are different, whatever they're trying to accomplish. And so a lot of the other metadata types that aren't really for a platform development are really for Salesforce CRM. So when Einstein comes out, there's another dozen metadata types. When a new Salesforce capability comes out for portals or for forums or all of the different features they have, all of that stuff is encoded in metadata types. And that's how on the back end, they remember what all that stuff does. But on the front end, that's how you can see what it does and move it from org to org. So in org-based development on the right, you tend to have a lot more metadata types, and you tend to deal a lot more with packaging and so on and so forth and things like that. So it's stored in an org, it's stored in a package, and of course you can also take a snapshot of it and bring it down to a local project. Some of those metadata types are not particularly easy to edit. Now, we talked earlier about profiles. If you have a gigantic profile, it's just a triple boatload of XML, and it's hard to edit and understand what a profile does, as a human looking at a text editor, looking at that XML. So that's kind of the challenge there. In the middle is online repositories. And so that tends to be used by admins or developers. And, I think sometimes you hear the recommendation that everything you do in every org should be mirrored by an online repository, and you should have a repo, and then you do all of your XML merge in the repo, and then you do deployments out of the repo. I'm a skeptic about some of that. I think there's some issues there. One issue is just that if you're using Git or using an online system, putting gigabytes of profile data there doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Putting gigabytes of reports or dashboards or documents or some of the other gigantic metadata types, why are you doing that exactly? Where I think repos make a lot of sense is if you're doing code merge. If you're doing developers with projects and you're trying to figure out how does Bob's code fit in with Sue's code and how can I merge them and put them together, that's really what online repositories are designed for. And I don't know if sometimes people don't know this, but Git was designed by Linus Torvalds, the creator of Linux, to manage the open source submissions to the Linux kernel. And so Git, a full understanding of Git is hard to come by. It's a very complex system. And I think it's more for developers than it is for admins in some cases. And, so use it carefully. I think that's my advice. And use it for code merge, use it for projects and things like that, where it makes sense to use it and where you're not dealing with absolutely gigantic numbers of documents and document sizes that aren't really human readable. Git's compare tools and merge tools are not very strong. They're not based on Salesforce, and so something to think about with Git. All right, let's dive. Hopefully this is making sense to everybody. Let's dive a little bit deeper here into second generation packaging. And so today, if you use the metadata API and you grab all of the unpackaged metadata out of your Salesforce order, what you will get is up to 200 different folders of different metadata types. And the things like custom objects, Apex code, dashboards, reports, all 200 different metadata types. But they'll be in flat folders. So all your custom objects will be in one folder. And then all your Apex classes will be in another folder. And so this actually works out pretty well for org administration or for compliance, for pushing metadata between orgs. It's okay. But this is not what enterprise developers want to see. Enterprise developers want to see things organized by application. So if I have an inventory management program that I've written to extend Salesforce, hopefully that's in a package. And I've got a couple of Apex classes, I've got a couple of custom objects, I've got a couple of custom tabs or flows, whatever the metadata assets are that are in that package, then this is kind of a vertical orientation of the metadata, but this is really what people, at least enterprise developers, want to see is a horizontal differentiation, a package that includes a number of those different types. And so this allows an agile development team to focus on one application to the exclusion of all that other stuff, to have different versions of it, to test it in isolation, design it in isolation, and really then focus on the functionality of that package instead of focusing on all the other stuff in your org. And so this is a big reason, kind of a functional reason, also kind of a political reason, that Salesforce wants to support better packaging of applications, to support better software design and development, source-based development on the Salesforce platform, because they're getting hammered by enterprise developers. This thing doesn't make any sense to us. We want this thing, and how do we get there? So, and why? So we're kind of starting to touch on that. So the idea is really complexity reduction, which goes kind of back to my first slide. And so what you really want is a more agile developer capability. You want to reduce the org complexity. isolate bugs, version control, individualized testing, and then be able to distribute those packages anywhere, into partner orgs. So, App Exchange partners want to be able to distribute those to partners. But even if you're in a large enterprise, being able to push a package into the sandbox for user acceptance, into production, be able to, push a package into Scratch org and go test it out, see what it's doing. All of that's really, really important. And so the way that I think about it is packages are like source code, and unpackaged metadata is like object code. So the packages themselves don't run. You have to install a package, and then those assets become mirrored into the unpackaged metadata. And so everything in your package, if it's a managed package, it has all of those assets have a namespace when they go into the unpackaged metadata. If it's just a regular unmanaged package, second generation unlocked package, then all of those assets don't have a namespace, but they all go into the unpackaged metadata. That's where they run. So really then, the idea is to stop looking at all of the unpackaged metadata because it's too confusing. It's too much of a flat file system. It's very hard to figure out what the heck's going on there. And so that's why you want to transition to packages, so that you can have these isolated units of source code that do make sense to an agile development team. And then that really reduces the complexity of having to look at all that unpackaged metadata. So, but just to be clear, all of your packages end up in the unpackaged metadata, anyway. And so I think one concept is, okay, so we could take everything in our org and we could convert it into packages, and then our org would be super organized. It would have, it would all just be packages of all the things that we were using and needed to deploy anywhere. And I think that's a great goal, but it's not going to happen. And I'm going to show you why it's not going to happen. So just before we get there, this isn't an absolute thing you have to do. It's kind of a shades of gray thing, where if you're dealing with complexity, if you're needing to do agile development, if you have applications that you're changing a lot, those are really good reasons to move to packaging. If everything's fine, you don't have to do this. You can leave things the way they are. Just be careful about complexity, because it's kind of the enemy of a Salesforce. So the reason that everything's not going to turn into a package is the Salesforce CRM product. And that's another having fun again with monkeys. I don't know what my deal is that's the 800-pound gorilla. So if you think about it, the standard Salesforce objects, accounts and contacts, and there's 1,000 of them, literally. And about, I'd say, 150 to 200 of the metadata types are directly related to the Salesforce CRM product. And that's the product that we know and love. It's probably the reason we're all here, in a way. And you use it through the HTML interface that Salesforce provides. That's how Salesforce became such an important company with such a great product. But these assets are not packaged, and they're not going to be packaged either. And the reason is that if you look back to the history of Salesforce, you go back to 2004, 2003, before there was even an API, a lot of those objects and a lot of those metadata assets have magical properties that are not the same as a custom object today. And think about things like price book entries and polymorphic assets like events and activities. And you think about things like how groups and queues and roles work. Those are some of the most ancient objects in Salesforce, and they're not going to be packaged. It's not going to happen. And other assets in the Salesforce CRM system, like users and licenses and profiles, are of absolutely kind of generic use for any package. So the point is that org-based administration is not going away, and it's very important, if only to manage future versions of the Salesforce CRM product that come out. And so winter is about to come out. And so now you need to say, you know, what does my sandbox look like? What does my production org look like? Are these new features in winter? How do we adopt them? And all of that is not packaging. So the important point is that packaging is really all about apps you're building and customizations that you've made that you need to push forward as a company or as an app exchange partner, or you know, however you need to do that. And so I think sometimes people talk about, well, it's either going to be source-based development or org-based administration, and which one's going to win. They're both important, and they're both really vital moving forward for Salesforce as a platform. So I hope that makes sense to everybody. And it kind of brings up this philosophical issue, you know, is Salesforce a product or is it a platform? You know, if you could package that CRM product, then you know, I guess everything would be a platform, and you know, Salesforce CRM would be like Financial Force or one of the other big packages that you could install. But anyway, I think it's kind of a false choice. But definitely, Salesforce is in a transition where the platform is becoming more important over time, especially to people building on the platform and customizing Salesforce. So anyway, that's just my take on it. All right, let's start talking a little bit of a deep dive about packaging, because I think